Margaret Town News. I'm going to read this story today. It's from a book, Warriors of the Rainbow. And I found this book in my dad's shed. It was a book that my mom had been saving for many years. And this part that I'm going to read here is An Eskimo in Search of God by Willoya. And there's a drawing of this Eskimo man. It looks like he's hunting a polar bear, but I didn't know that the Eskimos hunted polar bear. Well, actually, they must, because I remember Mom telling me that they never ate the polar bear liver because I guess a lot of the white settlers that came and ate the polar bear liver died of vitamin A poisoning, because the polar bear liver is rich in vitamin A. And here's the picture I'm saying. There's the Eskimo man, and he looks like he's gonna go hunt the polar bear. Early life. I was born in Nome, Alaska on July 11th, 1939. My parents are mostly Eskimo, but with some white mixture. Our tribe was from King Island, Bering Straits, and Teller on the mainland north of Nome. The white men thought of us as a primitive people with little learning, but we knew how to live in the ice and cold and snow of the far north, where the white men died when they were cut off from their supplies. That is very true. And before the white man came to us with his civilization, we were a part of the Spirit of God and the wilderness, in a way the white man never understood. Out of my childhood memories and dreams and meditations, also from the wisdom of the old people, the ones who knew the old ways, comes a spirit of love and tenderness that the Eskimo needs to give to the world. In this story, I want to form a bridge with my thoughts between the world of primitive man, the world of modern man, and the world that is to come. The old lady who was my grandmother by adoption filled the days of my childhood with a love that sang. She was a full-blooded Eskimo and had known the times before the white men came. The long ago times when our hunters bravely hunted the walrus, the polar bear, and the seal with spears. Tipped with ivory or horn. As a 4-year-old, she told me to obey, for it would bring me its reward. As a 6-year-old, I can remember her kind, brown, and wrinkled face smiling at me with all the kindness and goodness in the world. And I remember her laughing most wonderfully when I brought her my treasures from the sea, brown pieces of kelp, shells of the big crabs, and stones where bright colors caught my eyes. When hurt or sick, she nursed me and soothed me so that the touch of her hands wrote a music of tenderness. She died in my 8th year, and that was a sad year, as if All the world had ebbed away into the blackness of grief. But the memory of her always remains, guiding me with her deep wisdom and her knowledge of what the ancient people knew. For her love fixed in me a bond with the life of the Eskimo that will abide with me forever. You who live in civilization, can you open your minds and hearts and see with me the long Arctic nights, the long, long darkness, when I and other little children sat in the flickering light of the seal oil lamps and looked up into the wrinkled face of wisdom? Can you hear the cold Arctic wind howling outside and banging on the walls, and hear also the strange and wonderful stories of the old days coming from those lips like streams of gold? We learned how the hunters rose on the ice and threw their spears to draw the blood of the great white bear, Nanook Sook. That's the great white bear. How the tribe nearly starved to death when the seals withdrew somewhere into the blackness of the great north, and skin was boiled to make soup, was a frightening story. But through all the stories, like a golden thread, was the goodness of the people to each other, their kindness and their thoughtfulness, their humble worship of the Great Spirit, and their heroic sacrifices when danger threatened. She who was the heart and soul of my beginning told me that my heart must remain open and sincere, that I was to live life to the fullest. She always told my mother and me that meditation, sincere thinking about God, must be a daily habit. Later, I would know the meaning and value of this when life would test me. When evil befell me, meditation and prayer would be the cords that led me back to God. Playing as a child and listening to stories and wisdom from the Old One, my life was enveloped in a glorious world where troubles never seemed to come and people were always happy. But this changed when I went to the first grades in school and found myself shoved with other Eskimo and Indian children into separate buildings from the white children. One day, when I was with a group of Eskimo children, some white children shouted names at us. I can still remember their faces, twisting with meanness at the shrill hate in their shouts. Blinded with tears and the feeling I was not loved or wanted, I asked my mother if I could leave the school with its separate racial buildings. All my favorite friends were leaving. Why could I not go also? Why do people have to be so ignorant and cruel? For a long time after that, I looked on white people with suspicion. For a long time, my childish life was filled with the nightmare of the white man's misunderstanding. The love of a protecting sister helped somewhat to ward off this outer world of unreason. I turned also to nature, to the wilderness of the tundra and the rocks of the sea for help. The wild cry of the geese honking northward in the springtime. the auks and the puffins nesting in the clouds on the rocks of the coast, the sight of the small, furry lemmings darting through the short grass and the moss. All these reminded me that I also was a child of the Great Spirit. But the scar of my first childish brush with the white man's intolerance and blindness would remain deep within me, making me in my youth and early manhood cautious and withdrawn. For a long time, I could not talk to a white man as one friend talks to another. I talked to my school friends about this that troubled me, investigating their ideas. One of my friends told me that because the races were not really acquainted with one another yet, I should be patient. Another told me that life would always take on certain patterns. There would always be evil and misunderstanding. But I felt that somehow love one day would change things, that someday when I could fill the shoes of the old ones with their goodness and kindness, I could help bring this love to the world. Well, that's the end of that section. I think I'll read the next section tomorrow. That kind was a sad section. And I remember when I was in first grade and I went to school in Nome, and I guess now I know why the Eskimo kids threw snowballs at me. Because of that horrible history. And the fact that I was white. Well, I'm still white now, but that's one thing I have realized is that I'll always be white. Because God made me this color, and this is the color I'm going to be. So, and I was also remembering as I was reading that, I remembered the Eskimo woman when our family first moved to Nome, and she brought us 2 giant blueberry pies. And I just fell in love with the Eskimo people so much because they just have a sweetness that you cannot imagine. And yeah, that's why I love the Eskimo people. And I have to say, those pies were the most delicious pies I ever ate in my life. She picked all those blueberries. Talk about generosity. It's so incredible that she picked all those blueberries for 2 huge blueberry pies. She picked the blueberries from the tundra, and then she made the blueberry pies and brought them both down the hall in the tiny apartment that we lived in, and gave them to our family and said, "Welcome to Nome." Oh, it was so kind. Oh my gosh. That's one thing I learned when I was growing up, is to be kind. Especially in that climate, because, it's kind of like and actually the winter that we were there was one of the coldest winters on record. That's why I cry, because, we're just going to have to cut it here. Maybe I'll tell that story. But needless to say, that weather can be really brutal. Thanks for watching Margaret News.